Thank you so much for supporting my small new channel. If you're a true crime fan but aren't familiar with Asian cases, make sure to hit subscribe. We cover the darkest stories you've likely never heard. Today's case takes us to Hong Kong, a city that, over the years, has seen several notorious crimes that gained international attention. You've probably heard of the infamous Hello Kitty murder in 1999, but long before that, there was another case that shocked the nation. This was Hong Kong's very first high-profile murder case, one that earned the killer chilling nicknames, the Jars Killer and the Rainy Night Butcher. He prowled the streets on stormy nights, using his taxi to pick up unsuspecting female passengers before carrying out brutal attacks. The story was so shocking that it later inspired several films, including the 1992 movie Dr. Lam. But be warned, this case comes with gruesome details. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Now, let's dive into the case of Lam Kor-wan, the Jars Killer. It was a seemingly ordinary day in February 1982 when construction workers building a bridge in Sha Tin, a neighborhood along the Xingmen River in Hong Kong's New Territories, stumbled upon a horrifying sight. Floating in the river was a woman's head. Soon after, police also recovered 2 legs and 2 arms nearby. The remains were confirmed to be from the same unidentified woman, sparking fear across the city. A massive 6-month investigation followed. Finally, on August 19, 1982, police arrested 27-year-old Lam Kor-wan, a quiet taxi driver who worked the night shift. The very next day, the truth began to unravel. Investigators revealed that body parts from multiple women had been found hidden in Lam's home. The grisly discoveries shocked the nation. According to reports, the remains of at least 3 women had been butchered, with their sexual organs preserved in jars and boxes inside his flat. Even worse, when police searched his belongings, they uncovered hundreds of photographs and videotapes Lam had taken. He had documented everything: his victims' bodies, the dismemberment process, and even posed for photos with the corpses. In total, investigators recovered more than 1,000 photographs, a chilling archive of his crimes. What could turn a young man into such a monster? Lam's story began in Malaysia, where he endured years of physical abuse. His parents regularly beat him, once so violently that he lost consciousness. When his family later moved to Hong Kong, the abuse stopped, but the damage was already done. As a teenager, Lam struggled socially. He had difficulty getting along with classmates and spent most of his time isolated at home, often playing chess alone. This loneliness and resentment festered, and would eventually spiral into unimaginable violence. As Lam grew older, he took a job as a taxi driver. He preferred the night shift. He liked the silence, the emptiness of the streets, and the sense of anonymity that darkness provided. But behind his quiet exterior was a deeply twisted inner world. Lam had no friends and certainly no girlfriend, though that didn't mean he lacked desire. In secret, he hoarded lewd magazines, spending hours alone in his room, even re-photographing the pictures, as if recreating them gave him some sense of control. Still, that wasn't enough. Looking for something more thrilling, he bought a Polaroid camera and began sneaking into public restrooms to snap photos under the stalls of unsuspecting women. That obsession ended only when one woman caught him in the act and chased him through the streets. But instead of stopping, Lam's desires escalated. His next fixation became photographing the dead, because, in his own chilling words, dead bodies don't resist. He could take his time, explore, and document without interruption. On a rainy February night in 1982, his disturbing fantasies turned into action. Around 4 a.m., Lam's taxi passed a restaurant when a young woman flagged him down. She was 22-year-old Chan Fenglan, a nightclub dancer from the Chinese Palace nightclub. That night, Chan had been drinking heavily with her sister and some friends. By the time she stepped into Lam's cab, she was drunk and vulnerable. Not long after, she asked Lam to pull over so she could vomit. He stopped at a service station, and when she got back inside, she told him to return. But moments later, she changed her mind again. That small act, her indecision, infuriated Lam. He lost his temper. Pulling the car over once more, he wrapped an electric wire around her neck and strangled her. When Chan stopped breathing, Lam didn't panic. Instead, he calmly drove her lifeless body back to his flat. It was just before dawn, the streets were empty, and no one noticed him carry the body inside. Lam lived with his family, so he slid Chan's corpse beneath the sofa, waiting silently in his room until everyone left for work. Only then could he begin what he had really planned. The next morning, once Lam heard his family leave the house, he began preparing for what he had been waiting for. He covered the bedroom floor with plastic sheets to keep the blood from soaking into the floorboards. Then, with chilling precision, he used an electric saw to cut Chan Fenglan's body into pieces. He photographed and videotaped the entire act, documenting every moment as though it were a ritual. When he was done, he carefully wrapped the head, limbs, and torso separately and loaded them back into his taxi. That night, he drove to the Xingmun River and dumped the body parts. A week later, the remains surfaced, discovered by construction workers building a bridge. And with that first kill, Lam had unleashed something inside himself that he could never control again. Over the next 7 months, his crimes escalated into a spree that left 3 more women dead in horrific and gruesome ways. Unlike his first murder, which had erupted in rage, his second was planned. Before setting out to hunt, Lam bought surgical tools and bottles of formaldehyde. His next victim was Chan Wan-kit, a 31-year-old bank cashier. He lured her into his cab and strangled her with the same electric wire. This time, he went further. After taking her home, Lam committed necrophilia before cutting her body apart. It was reported that this was the first time Lam had ever experienced sexual intercourse on the corpse of his victim. He continued to perform these acts on his subsequent victims. After dismembering Chan Wan-kit, he placed her remains inside a rice sack and discarded it along Taihang Road. His third victim was Lung Sao-wan, a 29-year-old waitress. Her body was discovered in another rice sack in the same area. Finally, Lam targeted his last victim, 17-year-old Lung Wai-sum, a student. That night, her friends had put her in a taxi to make sure she got home safely, never realizing she had stepped into the car of a serial killer. Around 9:30 p.m., Lam handcuffed the girl inside his cab. But unlike the others, he didn't kill her right away. Instead, he spoke to her for hours, rambling about his family, religion, and his life. He kept her alive until nearly 4 a.m., before ultimately strangling her too. When Lam's night shift ended, his young victim had fallen asleep in the back of his cab. He used the moment to strangle her, then brought her body home to carry out the same horrific rituals as before. As he prepared to photograph her remains, a desk lamp tipped over and burned her thigh. That single burn mark would later become a critical clue leading to his arrest. One of the strangest aspects of Lam's crimes was his arrogance, or perhaps his recklessness. He developed the photographs of his mutilated victims at a local Kodak store, as if he didn't care whether anyone discovered his secrets. At first, the technician who handled the prints thought the images were unsettling, but might be part of medical research. When questioned, Lam claimed he was a university lab technician working on anatomical studies. The excuse seemed flimsy, but the worker let it go. That changed on August 17, 1983. When Lam submitted another roll of film, the technician finally saw images that removed all doubt. Explicit photos of a naked woman, close-ups of her burned thigh, and a severed breast. It was clear these weren't experiments. They were evidence of murder. The Kodak employee immediately alerted the police. That night, officers staked out the store and waited. When Lam arrived in his taxi to pick up the photos, they moved in. He insisted the pictures weren't his, claiming he was simply collecting them for a friend. The police didn't believe him. They followed him home and began a search of his room. Beneath his bed, they found a metal box. Inside were stacks of photographs of dismembered bodies, videotapes of his crimes, and several Tupperware containers, each sealed with tape. What they discovered inside those containers would shock Hong Kong to its core. A detective carefully opened the metal box, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Inside was a jar containing a woman's severed breasts, preserved in formaldehyde. Not long after, a British female forensic chemist arrived at the scene to assist with the examination. When she opened another container, she uncovered something even more disturbing: pickled female genitals. The discovery was so grotesque that Hong Kong police feared the case might be too traumatizing for a female expert to continue with, and she was replaced by another specialist. At first, investigators suspected Lam's entire family might have been involved. His father and brother were arrested alongside him, but after hours of interrogation, it became clear: Lam had acted alone. He confessed to every detail of his crimes without hesitation. Because of the case's shocking brutality, only male jurors were selected when Lam went on trial. On April 3, 1983, he was convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. However, when Hong Kong abolished the death penalty in 1993, Lam's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He has remained behind bars at Shek Pik Prison on Lantau Island ever since. Chillingly, Lam showed no remorse. In an interview with psychiatrist Dr. William Green, he admitted that he had not only preserved his victims' remains but even consumed parts of one woman's body. He claimed his motivation was not sexual, but rather that God told him to kill. If not for the sharp-eyed Kodak technician who tipped off the police, there's little doubt Lam would have continued his killing spree, claiming countless more victims. And that is the case of Lam Kor-wan, the taxi driver who turned into Hong Kong's most notorious serial killer, a man whose crimes still haunt the city decades later.